Greetings one and all, and welcome to Combat Critiques. For this entry, let's have a look at the fight between Westley and Inigo from The Princess Bride. As per usual, let's start off with examining the objective of each side. As we'll see in a second, neither of these guys really wants to do the other any harm. They're just here by a matter of circumstance. Westley is trying to rescue his beloved, and Inigo's only here because he needs a paycheck. So Westley's goal is to get past Inigo, while Inigo is stalling him. But, as we'll get into, dynamics can change. Forgive me for skipping or speeding up some dialogue, but this site has been out for blood with copyright claims, and creators larger than myself, even some big ones, have been having trouble.
Thank you. Well, wait until you're ready.
So after climbing up a massive cliff, Inigo lets Westley recover from the exertion. In fact, he actually helped him up, despite being ordered to kill him. Again, he really doesn't have any fondness for his employer, and is only doing this to put food on the table. The two get to talking, and Inigo reveals that he's dedicated his life to hunting down the man who killed his father, and has trained in fencing for the past 20 years so that he can find this man and kill him. Seeing as Westley isn't that man, he has no real grievance with him. So once Westley is ready, the two of them open up, and we can see that at first, they're just testing each other. You can see this a lot in fighting tournaments, where instead of just bum-rushing each other, each fighter will throw out a few attacks that aren't even really intended to hit their opponent. They're just meant to see how they react. Is your enemy going to fall back, or will they try to counter and move in? Will they block, parry, or evade? How quick is their reaction time? Do they have any side that they favor? All of this is incredibly valuable information. The pair throw a few more strikes, this time getting a bit closer to each other. Now, fencing is different from combat that was more common in earlier centuries. For one, the combatants didn't wear armor as frequently, so strikes can more easily damage each fighter. Neither Westley nor Inigo here are wearing armor, so any thrust or well-aimed slash will go straight into them, meaning that they can't afford to take a hit. Their weapons are also rapiers, which are smaller and nimbler than something like an arming sword. That would be useless on a medieval battlefield, but in single combat duels, they're incredibly effective. The two then commit more to their attacks, and I have to say, despite the fact that this movie isn't meant to be taken super seriously, this fight does a great job at gradually escalating the combat of this fight. The two don't just plow into each other right off the bat. They slowly ease into it after getting a feel for their opponent. Most media doesn't do that. Characters will either putz around for ages before anything happens, or else they'll just haul off into each other immediately without a plan. This is strangely more realistic, and it's coming from a movie meant to be goofy. Admittedly, Inigo does a completely unnecessary spin here, and if Westley had wanted to, he could have stabbed him in the back pretty easily. Media seems to love spins. Yeah, they look flashy, but they leave you completely exposed to attacks. Fistfights can be a little different in that regard. One of my favorite things to do while sparring against an aggressive opponent in my martial arts classes was to perform a spinning back kick. They'd rush in as soon as they saw my back was exposed, but they'd run themselves into my foot. That's not as viable in armed combat though. It could potentially work, but when you're wielding weapons that can do serious harm in a single hit, that's just too much of a risk to take. Also, we can see in some shots that the rapiers they're using are obviously props, as they bend too much when struck. A proper sword should have some flex to it, yes, but not that much. It's not a huge issue, just a minor detail that I should mention.
You're using Bonetti's defense against me, huh?
I thought it fitting, considering the rocky terrain.
But the two are pretty evenly matched, and this brings me to a point that a lot of people miss nowadays. Just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean that you have to hate them. Too many people decide that someone is a complete monster just because they don't agree on something. Westley and Inigo really don't have any grudge against each other. In fact, they're starting to respect each other more for their skill. It's like how us guys can become friends after getting into a fist fight. If you both give as good as you get, then you can respect each other for that.
Naturally, you must expect me to attack with Capaferro.
Naturally, but I find that Tybalt cancels out Capaferro.
I would like to point out that Westley is deliberately moving onto higher ground. That might help if you're dealing with ranged weapons at a great distance, but not so much in melee. You see, it's difficult to attack an opponent's lower body without dropping your guard and exposing yourself. But if you stand on a higher elevation, they can more easily attack your legs, which can be challenging for you to defend against. Simultaneously, you will only be able to effectively attack their head and upper body, so they don't have to defend as much of an area.
Unless the enemy has a study, he's a gripper. Which I have.
But the two are just having fun with it at this point, as Westley jumps back off the rock and allows Inigo to do his acrobatic flip off of it as well. It's a nice bit of dynamic storytelling that lets us see their dynamic unfold without explicitly telling us. I also like how this fight has been showing us that the two have been using their weapons in a way that relatively mimics how you'd fight in this scenario. The two don't have any armor, so they're keeping their distance, relying on the length of their weapons to keep them safe. Most of the stuff in modern media is just brutish baseball bat swinging with no sense of tactics. Again, it makes me laugh that a movie that's meant to be goofy is taking itself more seriously than some of the movies and shows made by mega corporations.
You are wonderful.
Thank you.
The two then maneuver back to where they started, and Westley strikes at Inigo 3 times in quick succession at the same spot. Now, this could be considered a bad move, but it could also be a means of getting him to lower his guard. When sparring, sometimes I would deliberately fall into a pattern so that my opponent could recognize it. Then when they got used to it, I'd switch it up, and they wouldn't be prepared, expecting me to do what I'd done before. Westley might be doing something similar here. Lure Inigo into complacency, and then get him when he stops paying attention. It's just speculation, but that isn't such a bad idea, especially if you've managed to get your opponent onto the back foot.
I admit it, you are better than I am.
Then why are you smiling?
Because I know something you don't know.
And what is that?
I am not offended.
Inigo then does a neat trick where he switches his weapon from his left hand to his right without breaking stride. No, really, look at how his weapon never actually left him exposed while he did that. I'm actually impressed by that bit. A worse film might have had Inigo do something as absurd as holding his weapon in a reverse grip or something, but he managed to keep his guard up while switching hands at the same time. Credit where it's due. Again, Westley puts himself on the high ground, and another disadvantage that you'd have to contend with here are the steps. The previous area was a rock formation that was a mostly even slope, but steps are a bit trickier. Given that stairs are sharp 90-degree platforms, you'd have to go up them backwards while estimating the distance between each one and its height. This is all while Inigo is still attempting to land a strike on you. That's a lot of distraction that you don't need to put yourself through. Given that these are also ruins, you can't say for certain whether these stairs are still even. They might have eroded, and if you slip up because of that, then it could very well result in a game over for you. He does even lose his balance at this point, though he's able to recover. Their weapons do strike the stonework, which wouldn't be good for them, but you can't always avoid that depending on where a fight's taking place.
You're amazing. I ought to be up to 20 years.
Oh, there's something I want to tell you.
Tell me.
But Inigo manages to pin Westley against the remains of the wall here. This position makes it so that Westley can't really strike him with any effectiveness, but he also really can't do all that much to Westley with his weapon. If he was being more serious, he could attack with his offhand, but as we showed, both of them are really just in it for the fun at this point. Yeah, they're still kind of trying to kill each other, but I'd be willing to bet that if one of them surrendered, the other would probably accept it. They did speak for a while before the fight, after all.
I'm not left-handed either.
But Westley is able to throw Inigo off, and switches his weapon from his left hand to his right, though in a much more dramatic fashion than Inigo. Inigo again lets him do this, as not only is he having fun with this fight, but it seems from his dialogue that he really hasn't come across anyone as skilled as he is. I imagine that if he's going after the six-fingered man that killed his father, he's going to want to be as good with a sword as he possibly can be. And you don't get better at something by going up against people who aren't as good as you. This is probably a great chance for him to test himself and possibly learn. If he survives, that is. But Westley manages to disarm Inigo. In a show of sportsmanship, he lets him go and retrieve his blade. He could easily have stabbed him right then and there, but he didn't. He has a sense of respect for his opponent, and thus isn't going to cheap shot him like that. Inigo then lets Westley come down to him in turn, not attacking him while he deliberately leaves himself exposed. This would be seriously out of place if the story was meant to be taken seriously, but the tone of this film is mostly lighthearted. It isn't meant to be gritty and realistic, which is something a lot of media doesn't seem to get. Not everything has to be grandiose and epic. Sometimes you can just make something that's meant to be fun. If you own that, and don't pretend that your work is the next ultra-serious masterpiece, then you can lessen up on the tone and just have some fun every now and then. The two have another series of exchanges, and aside from Inigo's doofy maneuver where he turns his back to Westley, this sequence isn't all that bad. A great way to measure fight scenes, especially ones with melee weapons, is to slow it down or pause it. Look at where the characters' weapons are when they meet. If you were to remove one, would the other character's weapon have hit its target, or just where their opponent's weapon was? We can see that in a good number of these shots, each character's sword would have hit their opponent. It doesn't happen every time, and it doesn't necessarily need to. Sometimes you could be testing your opponent's guard, or trying to get them to become complacent by attacking one area, but in general, most strikes should be aimed at your opponent, not their weapon. But now both characters clamber onto the high ground, meaning that they're still roughly on even footing. This does, however, limit their lateral movement. They can move forward or back pretty much without hindrance, but stepping to the side is either blocked by the low wall, or could leave them vulnerable if they look away to judge the distance of the drop on the other side. Inigo then makes a move that reminds me of one of the Berserker's executions from For Honor. He really needs to keep a better grip on his weapon. Now their exchanges are much more engaged. Unlike at the beginning, where they were keeping their distance and testing the waters against each other, they're leaning much more into their strikes and are attacking much more quickly. A point to note is that Westley is almost always on the advance in this fight, while Inigo is almost always giving ground. That doesn't mean that either is necessarily better than the other, though. A tactic that I'd use in sparring was to give ground and be just outside of my opponent's range until they got impatient and overextended. And that's when I'd make my move. Inigo appears to be doing much the same. Westley is a more aggressive fighter, which is a sort of glass cannon strategy. It can be extremely rewarding if you overwhelm your opponent, but if they manage to counter you while you're extending too far, then you've done yourself in.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Westley's moves have been mostly grounded, while Inigo's had a few rather outrageous ones. Like this one here where he lunges past Westley. Is it realistic? No, but again, the tone isn't meant to be. That's why I can let this slide, and not something like that stupid lightsaber spinning that Anakin and Obi-Wan do in Revenge of the Sith.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
But the comedic aspect gets ramped up here at the end, with Inigo using both hands on his rapier, while getting distracted by Westley's circling motion. He gets disarmed for a third time, and is now at Westley's mercy. This movie is mostly whimsical and comedic, so this doesn't bother me too much.
Kill me quickly. I will soon destroy a stained glass window as nice like yourself. However, since I can't have you following me either.
But we can see again that Westley has come to respect Inigo for putting up a good showing. Instead of killing him, he knocks him out and lets him live. Granted, I don't think a casual strike like that would knock someone out cold, but I'll let it slide. So overall, this was an entertaining, and aside from a few instances, a relatively well done fight. We got to see character development through a fight scene, instead of it just being them bashing away at each other mindlessly, and there was some thought put into the choreography. If you haven't seen this film, then I'd say give it a watch. Seriously, when a friend suggested it for movie night, and I heard it was called The Princess Bride, I asked him, "What kind of a chick flick are you having us watch, dude?" I was severely mistaken.
I've never been so wrong in all my life.
It's not some janky chick flick, despite what the name would lead you to believe. This is an entertaining, fun movie that I'd suggest you give a watch if you're looking for something more laid back and lighthearted. But I'd like to thank you for watching, and leave this video a like if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. And may you all have a weapon in each hand.